What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? BizzyDad here, you there, checking out today's video, and thank you so much. This is a profile for the deck I like to call Max Pain. This is a Void Resonator deck. We are using the machines with a little bit of support from Red and Dark in this deck. We're also using some of the new cards from the Battle for Ataraxia set, a great machine support in the new set. Some of the new Resonators are great. Support cards are great. It makes machines definitely dangerous again. And it was just the release weekend. This past weekend, I took this deck to a local tournament, came in second place. We're not going to talk about how I lost in the finals 2-1, and we're definitely not going to talk about how in game 1 I did a little bit of bad math and was only able to bring my opponent down to 100 life instead of killing him. And of course, he beat me on the next turn. I won game 2, but lost game 3. He was spamming the Croco Sharks with the old Kaguya ruler, and it's a mess. So, we're not going to talk about that. So anyway, let's get into it. Our ruler for this deck is Machina, the Machine Lord. This is the old Machina, the original Machina from the 7 Kings of the Land set. There's a new Machina ruler in the Battle for Ataraxia set that I really haven't gotten a chance to dig into yet to see which one is better. The only reason why I would lean towards the old one as of now is because of his searchability on the ruler side, and we will get into that. So Machina is a void ruler. His race is 7 Kings, and his ability is X. Search your main deck for an addition or resonator with total cost X or less with no attribute, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Play this ability only once per turn. So if you have 1 stone that you can pay, you pay the 1 stone, search your deck for an addition or resonator worth 1. Reveal it, put it into your hand. So you can only do this once per turn, so you can't, if you have 4 stones up, you can't go in for a 2, then go back in for another 2. You can only do it once per turn. But the way this deck is set up, that is a really crucial element of setting your deck up. You're going to see it when we get into the cards. Machina also has a judgment ability, just cost 4. Again, this is void, so it's colorless. Any 4 stones will pay for this. And when he does J-activate, he turns into Machina, the Mechanical Emperor, with one of the most deadly enter effects, in my opinion. When this card enters your field, you may put up to 3 resonators and or additions with no attribute from your hand into your field. So just by him J-activating, just for paying the 4 and flipping him over, you get to put 3 void resonators and or additions. If you have 3 resonators, they all come out with Machina. If 2 resonators and an addition, all of that comes out with Machina. So really, the first part, the early game, you use Machina's front side to search your deck here and there, try to piece together the hand that you want for when it is time to J-activate, you bring them out with him. And the reason why this deck is called Max Pain is because once the deck is set up right and once your hand is set up right, when you do activate with Machina and bring them in, they are not alone, and they are powerful, and they are going to do what I call send the house. They just line up, everybody just rushes in, and it's just too much damage for anyone to block or withstand. So it's really effective, and it really works out. You're going to see as we get into the cards. Let's go into the stones, and like I said, this is a red and black supported deck. So we start with 4 Magic Stone of Scorched Bales. This is giving us access to both red or black, whichever we need at the time. And then we also just run 3 basic Firestones and 3 basic Dark Stones. These are a couple of the Dark Stones from the new set, and I like them. They look really nice. So those are our 10 stones, black and red. For the Resonators, we're going to start with 4 copies of the Clockwork Soldier. This is a 1-drop, and you can see they're void. This is colorless. Any color can pay for a void cost. This is a 1-drop, 300 attack, 300 defense with target attack. That is pretty good. That means it could go after a recovered Resonator if it wanted to. It also has an ability to pay 1, and this card gains 200 attack until the end of turn. However, at the end of turn, you must banish it. So kind of like overheating or self-destruct. If you have an extra stone, you could pump it up to 500 attack. But at the end of the turn, it's got to go. So if you need just a little bit more of an attack to finish something off, or if something's trying to kill it, you can pump it up 1 or even 2. It doesn't say that you can only do that once per turn. So if you had 2 stones, you can make it 700. And maybe that's a way to trade for your opponent if he's trying to send damage to you. You could pump the soldier up to 500 or 700, block it, and take him out too. 4 copies of the Clockwork Scout Plane. This is a really strong card. It's a 2-drop. 500 with flying, which is pretty remarkable. There are not too many 2-drop flyers with 500 that I know of, and they might be out there. But a 500 flyer for just a total cost of 2 is pretty good. Any flying resonator could be a real pain depending on how you play them. But again, 2 drops for 500. No other ability except the flyer. 3 copies of the Power Supply Team. Now here, this is a 3-drop with the same 500 attack, 500 defense as the Scout Plane. But this card has a really nice ability. If you banish it, you can recover a target resonator. So that's pretty interesting. If you have a resonator on your field that attacks and is now rested, you could banish the Power Supply Team, send it to the graveyard, and recover the resonator that just attacked and then swing again. And that actually really comes into play. This is part of what we want to have when we J-activate with Machina. 3 copies. 4 is a little too much. We could search for it with Machina's ability, and we can also search for it with this card right here. 3 copies of Dark Machina, the Gliding Shadow. So it's a 3-drop, 400, so the stats really aren't that good for the cost. But when this card enters your field, search your main deck for a card with no attribute. Reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your main deck. So when you play this, he comes out, and then you could search your deck for any card that is void. And for the most part, all the cards in this deck are void. A little bit of red and black, so you can't get that. But any of the other cards, or the resonators, or the spells, you could search your deck with Dark Machina. So again, we're seeing the theme of, as the game goes along, search cards out, get your hand ready for the J-activate, and bring everybody out. 4 copies of the Remote Control Beast. This is one of the new cards from Battlefront Arachnia. 4-drop, 800. So the stats are good. The cost is reasonable, but it gets better. You may pay 1 less to play this card for each machine you control. So the majority of these resonators are machines. So if we have a Clockwork Soldier on the field and a Clockwork Scout Plane on the field, this just becomes 2 to play. A 2-drop 800 is really strong and definitely good to have in the deck. They also feed off each other. For every time you put a machine out, they just become 1 less. So again, 4-drop by itself, 800, really good. For every machine out there, it's 1 less. Definitely run 4 copies of this. This is a great card. Now the big hitter of the deck. This is my lady in the Force at Will game. It's Marybell. Insane, self-aware machine. This is a 1200 with Pierce. Strong card. 5 drops, so it costs 5 to play. With Pierce, okay, but if that's not all, it has an ability to pay 1 stone. You rest a recovered resonator that you control. Then this card, being Marybell, gains that card's attack and defense until the end of turn, and also will gain that resonator's symbol skills until the end of the turn. So, for example, if you have Marybell on the field and the Clockwork Scout Plane, you pay the 1 and rest the Clockwork Scout Plane. Marybell then takes the 500. Now she becomes 17, and she'll gain the flying symbol skill. So for just 1 stone, Marybell, who is already a big enough beast, now becomes 17 with flying and pierce for the turn. That is just ridiculous. And there's also no maximum to that. It's not just once. If you have 2 stones and 2 recovered resonators, you can rest them both Marybell picks up everything. It makes her such a dangerous card. And as you can see, when you're putting this stuff together, you could play the Dark Machina and search out any card in your deck with no attribute. That's Marybell. She doesn't have any. She's colorless. She's void. Play Dark Machina, search out for Marybell, and you automatically have her in your hand. Really, really strong card. Ideally, when you come out, when you J activate with Machina, ideally what you're looking for is to hopefully have at least one Marybell, maybe two, and the power supply team in your hand too. These are 3 machines. They come out there, and we have other cards in this deck that make it possible for them to gain swiftness and strike right away. That's part of the whole sending the house strategy, and really it's just a killer when you get to do it. Let's move into the spells for this deck. Another card from the new set. This is Mariabella's work, and the human version of Marybell. Marybell is a robot, big doll. And this is Mariabella's work. And it says, draw 2 cards. However, again, just like our theme in this deck, you may pay 1 less to play this card for each machine you control. So again, the more machines you have in your field, the cheaper this becomes. And it's also a spell chant instant. So you could do this at any time. You could do this during your opponent's turn. Maybe you're in a pinch, your opponent is trying to attack you or destroy one of your resonators. If the cost is low enough and you have the stones, you could throw this down, draw 2 cards, maybe draw into a response or draw in a way to somehow lessen the damage. But a pretty strong card, and again, 5, maybe it's definitely steep for 5, I think, but the fact that if you just have 2 Clockwork Soldiers on the field, it's down to 3. So actually makes it really reasonable. Really good card, especially since it's instant. 3 copies of March of the Machine Lord. This is what I was talking about before. It's a 5 drop. It costs 5 to cast by itself, but again, you may pay 1 less to play this card for each resonator with no attribute you control. So the more machines and the more resonators you have on the field that have no attribute to it, this becomes less and less. So this is what I was talking about before. When you J activate and you bring out 3 machine resonators, this cost drops down to 2. Now, if you also happen to have a Clockwork Soldier or a Plane or another resonator on the board without an attribute, this now becomes free, which really is the knockout punch if you could get it to fall correctly. Because after all those resonators come on the field, if this hits, resonators with no attribute that you control gain +3/+3 and swiftness until the end of the turn. Which means if you do manage to get 2 Marybells out, they're both going to be able to attack that turn at 1,500 with Pierce. That's 3,000 damage with Pierce right there. Never mind any other resonator you have on the field that can also attack. And the power supply team, you can then banish the power supply team, which is unbelievable. So again, if we have a situation where we get the cards out there, we could swing with our Marybell 1,500 in Pierce because they have swiftness. We could swing again with another Marybell 15 Pierce because of swiftness. Banish the power supply team. Bring Marybell back up and then swing again. 4,500 damage with Pierce in one shot in just those 2 resonators. Again, not to mention anybody else you might have on the board. 4,500, I mean, that at that point of the game, it is probably game over. So again, just sending the house, you'd be able to attack with all the resonators out there if you could get it to stick. As if that's not strong enough, let's get some addition cards to help us out. So we run 4 copies of the Magic Screw. This is a Resonator edition, so you put this on one of your resonators. Added resonator gains +600/+600 as long as it is with no attribute. We run only resonators with no attribute. The screw could go on any of our resonators and buff them up 600 continuously, which is really dangerous. Early on, it is a 1 drop, so if you can just imagine having a scout plane on the board, putting the Magic Screw on it, it is now an 1111 with flying. It can swing for 1,100 in the air, which is probably going to get through. The additions also stack if you could somehow get a second one to stick. Now this plane is 1700 with flying, which again is just insane amount of damage. This deck, the way it's set up, if you get the cards right, you can send so much damage, and really that's just the theme of it. Just overpower your opponent. Here come some of the darling cards. This is 4 copies of Akashic Records of Eternal Flame. And here's our red support. Costs 1 red and 1 other. This is a field edition, so you put it down on the field and it just gives the global effect. You may pay 2 less to play a card if a card with the same name is in your graveyard. So basically, this is just making all your cards cheaper. So you would get this and put it out into the field. Once that hits the field, anytime something goes in your graveyard, it becomes 2 less to play. And we really take advantage of the fact that we run Void, no attributes. So really, this is just going to be any stones, which is really helpful. So since I really like the Scout Plane, let's just say we have a Scout Plane in our graveyard. That's in our graveyard dead. We have our Akashic Records out in play. So we have Clockwork Scout Plane in the graveyard. Its total cost is 2. However, Akashic Records says you may pay 2 less to play a card if a copy is in your graveyard. Well, we got a copy in our graveyard. 2 minus 2 is 0. So every time we have a Clockwork Scout Plane in our hand, it comes out for free. And this is really going to help us get these machines on the board. So when it gets to the time to J-activate, you can have 6, 7 machines on the board. And again, just send the house. Another plus with this is not just Resonators. Akashic Record says you can play any card for 2 less as long as a copy is in your graveyard. So if you have a Magic Screw in your graveyard and the plane is free, the screw is free. And now you have an 1100 flyer on the board for nothing. Then you can use your stones to use Machina's ability, go into your deck, search. Hey, maybe search for another plane. Boom, that comes out for free. You can see how these just stack and stack for less and less cost. Akashic Records is a great card. And then when your opponent kills you and kills your Resonators and sends them to the graveyard, he's essentially, or she, they're essentially helping you out. Anytime they destroy one of your Resonators or send something to your graveyard, they're just making the next one cheaper and the next one cheaper. And the longer the game goes, you're going to have stones, more stones and less cost. This helps you get more and more machines out, more and more screws out, everything else. And then before you know it, the board is just flooded and there's just nothing they could do except just sit there and watch it happen, which is amazing. So what can make that better? Well, I think we need to have a little bit of insurance to make sure we have stuff to play for cheap. So we have 4 copies of Niflehim, the Realm of the Dead. This is another field edition. And it says, zombies you gain control plus 200, plus 200. All right, well, great. We don't control any zombies, but we don't care because it's the second ability that helps us out here big time. Banish this card, put the top 5 cards of your main deck into your graveyard. So this right here, this is our discount package. We get our Akashic Records on the field. Now everything in our graveyard becomes 2 less to play. Well, if we get Niflehim out on the board too, if we don't have a lot of stuff in our graveyard, no problem. Just banish this card and the top 5 cards go in. Basically, you are putting 5 cards in there and hopefully they're all different types and they're all going to be less. If stuff like the soldiers and the planes are now free. Stuff like the Magic Screw is now free. Marybell now becomes only 3 to play if you want to play her out of your hand. The remote control beast is now only 2 to play. And if there are 2 machines on the board, now he's free. You can see how all of this stuff just combines and stacks and stacks. Even Mariabella's work now becomes 3 to play by itself. So everything becomes less, everything becomes cheaper, and you can get more and more out on the board. And again, the goal is just to J-activate and flood the field. There's nothing that your opponent's going to be able to do about it except just count up the thousands of damage and just say, well, I guess that's the game. We're going to move into our sideboard here. We're going to run 4 copies of Special Armor, and you could combine this or replace the Magic Screw for it. It really depends if you want to be a little more protective of your Resonators out there. This is an addition Resonator just like the Screw for 1 cost. And it says, if added Resonator would be destroyed, destroy this card instead. If you do, remove all damage from the Resonator. So it's basically just a free life. If you had this and put it on the remote control beast, if somebody hit it for 1,000 or did a card that says destroy Resonator, you wouldn't destroy it. You would just destroy the special armor. That would go into the graveyard. He would stay alive. And you could thank your opponent because now that this is in the graveyard, if you have any more special armors, now they're free. And you can just put it right back on the beast or any Resonator that's out there and make sure they can't be destroyed either. So special armor is a pretty good card. If you want to be a little more protective, you can go for this. The Magic Screw is in the main deck just for the aggression, just for being able to put so much damage up at one time. 3 copies of the Remote Control Golem. This is another card from the new set, from the Battle for Ataraxia set, and it's such a monster. It's a 10-drop, 2,000, 2,000, and just like everything else, it's a machine, and you may pay 1 less to play this card for each machine you control. So it's pretty tough to find a scenario to hard cast this. I mean, even if you had 3 on the field, it would cost 7 to play it. However, if it is in your hand, and again, we just go back to Machina judging, and you can bring 3 out. There it is. That's how you get it out onto the board for cheap. You can use Dark Machina to search for it, so it's in your hand, and then when Machina judges, slap it onto the field. The reason why I don't have this in the main deck, and I prefer Marybell in the main deck, is Marybell has Pierce. So when she does come in and she does attack, if anybody does block her, you'll destroy that Resonator, but all the leftover damage would go to your opponent. Whereas the Golem at 2,000 is great if your opponent has something 200, they could block, and yeah, that Resonator would die, but no damage would get to your opponent. A positive for the Golem, as if it was even necessary, it can't be destroyed. You cannot send a spell or ability to destroy this card. It has to either be beaten for 2,000, or you have to force your opponent to banish it with a spell or an ability. If that's the only Resonator on the field, then obviously that's the one they would have to banish. That's really the only way to get rid of it. It's a really strong card, but I do prefer Marybell in the main deck with the Pierce and also the ability to take attack, defense, and symbols from your other Resonators in a pinch. So if you want to go for that wow factor and try to get in for the 2,000 damage, you can replace Marybell with the Golem. I wouldn't. You could put her in there with Marybell, but I mean, this deck as it is can deal 5, 6, 7,000 damage when Machina judges if you play it right. So again, not necessary, but it's in there just in case. 2 copies of Black Moonbeam, another card from the new set. This, the jury's out. I like this card. It's a 2-drop spell instant, so it can happen at any time, but you do need 2 dark. It's not 2 of anything. And it's destroy target J-Ruler. Players cannot chase to this card. I think this card was made for Reflect Refrain because of how broken people say it is. I don't know. I have a Reflect Refrain deck that I'll do a profile on. And again, my channel is new. I do have another profile on this channel for Vlad. But as I said in that one, and I'll say in this one, I don't necessarily try to just to build the best deck with the best cards. I try to like make fun decks with interesting cards and cool combos. But people do like to lean on stuff that is proven to be super powerful, which is Reflect Refrain. This will get rid of it. Destroy target J-Ruler, and you can't chase to it. There's no response. If they J-activate to a J-Ruler, even on your turn, since it's an instant, boom. Black Moonbeam, your J-Ruler's dead. There's no questions asked. They gone. There's no response to it. There's no way to prevent it. So I keep it in the sideboard in case you run into a Reflect Refrain, and if you run into a Bahamut, if you run into anybody who's like really super aggressive, and if you have the stones, you can just take it right out. 2 copies of Split Heaven and Earth. This is an older card, 2-drop, but 2 red, and it's a spell chant. So you have to do this on your turn. Can't be at any time. And it says that this card deals 300 damage to each player for each special magic stone they control. So really we're talking about the dual stones, like the magic stone and Scorched Bale. It'll say right on there, special magic stone. So for every one of these special magic stones that each player controls, they're going to take 300 damage for it. So you will run into people who use 10 special magic stones in their deck. If you get this card in your hand, as long as you can withstand the hit yourself, you just let them go, maybe 3 stones, 4 stones, 5 stones, boom, hit them with this, it's 1,500 damage. Usually by the time it makes sense to play this, that could be the game ender. The tournament last weekend, I ended one of the games with the split Heaven and Earth. So it's good to have in the sideboard, just in case you play somebody who runs a ton of special magic stones. It's just another potential win condition for the deck, besides just building up the machines and sending them through. Finally, I have 4 copies of Call of Primogenitor. This is a 1-drop instant, 1 dark, and you put target Resonator from your graveyard into your hand. So if you're stuck between Mariabella's work or this, that could be one of the two. Mariabella's work lets you draw 2 cards instantly, which I think is really good, especially if you can get it for cheap. But if you don't like that, if you have something specific in your graveyard that you want to pull out, it's got to be a Resonator though. This is the card that will do it for you at any time. So you can just pay the 1 black, grab any Resonator that's out of the graveyard. And then a really good play would be, again, let's go back to our Scout Planes. If we got 2 Scout Planes in the graveyard and we have our Akashic Records out, that makes our cost 2 less. You can play the Call of Primogenitor, grab the Scout Plane out of your graveyard into your hand, and now it can come out for free because you have 1 in the graveyard. So again, these cards all seem to combo nicely and build off each other and really just make it tough. Couple of ways to win and really fun deck to play. So guys, that is it. That's the deck profile for Max Payne, Machina, the Machine Lord, Red Black. I'd really love to hear what you think. Comments, questions, suggestions. Do you like it? Do you hate it? Please leave some comments below. Likes are always appreciated. And please make sure to subscribe. As we go along, I'm going to introduce more videos, some matches, more deck profiles, other discussions, some tutorial stuff for new players. I was a new player. I was looking on YouTube too to learn as much as I can. So thanks again for a few minutes. Have a good day. See ya.